My name is Daniel, and if you had told me 15 years ago that I'd be standing in a $20 million mansion, staring down ghosts from my past at the front gate, I would have laughed in your face. But that morning, when the intercom buzzed and the screen lit up, my hands froze. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a delivery. It was them. The family that had erased me from their lives, the people who had thrown me away when I was still desperate for their approval, now staring at my estate with a hunger I could read even through the camera lens. I leaned against the marble counter of my kitchen coffee cup, trembling, the California sun pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My first instinct was denial. It had to be a mistake, a coincidence. But there was no denying those faces, older now, worn down by years, but still carved into my memory like scars that refused to fade. 15 years of silence, 15 years of pretending I never existed, and suddenly here they were, daring to ring my doorbell as if nothing had happened. You know, people imagine that success erases pain, that the money, the headlines, the company I built from scratch, all of it somehow fills the void left by betrayal. But when I saw them, all those years collapsed into a single heartbeat. I was no longer Daniel Carter, CEO, Forbes, cover story, self-made billionaire. I was the boy who had once begged for a seat at the table, who had cried quietly on birthdays forgotten, who had walked out of his family home with nothing but a small inheritance, and the last gift from the only person who ever truly believed in him. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had cut me out when I had nothing, when I was struggling just to be acknowledged. And now they showed up because I had everything. My mansion, my empire, my name. It wasn't me they wanted. It was what I represented: security, wealth, power. The family who had slammed the door in my face was now knocking, but not because they missed me. No, they came because suddenly I was useful again. I wish I could tell you I felt nothing, that I had transcended the anger, that I was untouchable. But the truth. My chest burned with a mixture of rage and longing. Some small broken part of me, the part that had once believed love could be earned, whispered, "Maybe they've changed." Yet the sharper voice, the one forged in years of loneliness and grit, cut through. They're here because they need you, not because they love you. I didn't open the gate right away. I stood there, staring at the screen, my heart thudding like a drum. Memories crashed into me, the cutting remarks, the absence at every milestone, the way I had been reduced to nothing more than a shadow, while my siblings basked in the glow of being enough. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to ignore them, to let them stand there until the California sun baked through their designer clothes and forced them to leave. But I didn't. Against every instinct, I pressed the button, the gate swinging open with a low mechanical hum. Why? Because even after 15 years, I still needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to show them the man I had become without them. They say silence can last forever, but that's a lie. Silence breaks the moment a doorbell rings after 15 years. As I walked slowly to the grand entryway, every step echoed against marble floors, my pulse thundering louder than my shoes. My reflection in the glass doors betrayed me, a man composed on the outside, but with a storm churning underneath. When I finally opened it, the sight nearly knocked the air from my lungs. There they stood. My father James, once tall and commanding, now hunched and gray, with lines carved deep into his forehead like cracks in old stone. My mother Margaret, her pearls still clinging to her neck as though they were a shield of dignity, even while her eyes darted nervously around the estate. My brother Andrew, heavier, now his former athlete's body sagging under years of neglect. And my sister Claire, perfectly dressed as always, clutching the hands of two children I had never met. My niece and nephew, innocent eyes peering up at me with curiosity. 15 years. 15 years of silence, of being cut out of their gatherings, of watching them parade family on social media as though I had never existed. And yet here they were, standing in awe of the life I had built without them. "Daniel," my mother's voice cracked with false warmth, "you look wonderful." I didn't return her embrace. I simply nodded and stepped aside, letting them in, though every instinct screamed at me to slam the door shut. Hospitality wasn't a gift for them, it was a calculated decision. If they wanted a meeting, I would control the terms. We walked through the foyer, their heads craning back to take in the vaulted ceilings, the sweeping staircase, the gallery of original art along the walls. Their gasps and murmured comments weren't lost on me. I knew what they were thinking. How could the forgotten son build all this? The living room swallowed them whole, its floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the gardens I had designed as a tribute to the only person who had ever loved me unconditionally, my grandmother. I motioned to the Italian leather sofas. They sat stiffly as if the furniture itself judged them for daring to be there. "I'll bring coffee," I said, slipping away to the kitchen. In truth, I needed the moment to breathe. Leaning against the counter, I let out a bitter laugh. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, the confrontation, the speeches I'd give, the power I'd wield. But standing here now, it was different. More raw, more complicated. When I returned, I carried a tray of porcelain cups. I poured slowly, deliberately, watching their eyes flicker between each other. That's when I decided to speak first, not about them, but to you, the ones listening to this story right now. Before I go on, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever had a family turn their back on you, if you know that sting of being invisible, then make sure you hit subscribe. Because stories like this, stories they never want you to hear, need to be told. And together we can keep them alive. I set the tray down and leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. So I said, voice calm, almost casual, 15 years, and now you're here. What is it you want to say? Their eyes shifted nervously. No one spoke at first. Finally, my father cleared his throat, his voice softer than I remembered. We thought, after everything, it might be time to reconnect. Reconnect. The word tasted like poison on my tongue. Reconnect after they had erased me from photos, from holidays, from their very definition of family. Reconnect now that the Wall Street Journal had plastered my face across its front page. I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch, savoring the way it made them squirm. Because this time I was the one in control, and they knew it. What they didn't know was that before this day was over, I would make sure they never forgot why they had lost me in the first place. I leaned back against the sofa, letting the weight of their words sink in. Reconnect. Such a simple word tossed into the air as though it could erase 15 years of silence. My eyes moved from one face to the next. My father, whose pride once meant more to me than anything, now stared at the polished floor, too ashamed or too calculating to meet my gaze. My mother, wringing her hands, offered me a smile so brittle it could shatter if I breathed too hard. Andrew avoided my eyes altogether, pretending to admire the architecture. And Claire, ever the actress, kept her face perfectly neutral, though her children clung tighter to her. And then, as if some cruel hand was flipping pages in my memory, I was pulled back into the years that shaped me. I was the youngest of 3. Andrew was the Golden Boy scholarships, trophies, charisma that made people orbit him. Claire was the starlet, captivating, confident, and every teacher's favorite. And me, I was the afterthought, the extra. The one who could bring home the same straight A's only to be met with a dismissive nod and a muttered, "That's what we expect." Meanwhile, my siblings' achievements were met with dinners, balloons, and glowing praise. It wasn't that I failed. It was that I didn't matter. I remembered the sting of my mother's comparisons. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" she'd ask when I stumbled through piano lessons. "Claire was playing Mozart at your age." My father didn't even pretend. He never missed one of Andrew's games, never skipped a chance to boast about his son's latest victory. But when I qualified for the state science fair, he waved it away with a sneer. "Science isn't really a spectator sport, Daniel." He said he had an important meeting. Later, I found out he'd rescheduled it to sit in bleachers and cheer at one of Andrew's practice games. The knife had sunk deepest on my 10th birthday. My mother had promised me a party. I made the invitations myself, colored paper, messy handwriting, so much hope packed into those crooked letters. The morning came and my heart raced with excitement. But over breakfast, she announced a change of plans. Andrew had a championship game. "We'll have to reschedule your party," she said matter-of-factly. My protests that my friends were coming in just 2 hours were met with my father's sharp voice. "Don't be selfish. Family comes first." Family comes first. That phrase would haunt me for years, burned into my mind like a cruel joke. Because when it came to me, family never came first. That afternoon, I sat in the stands of Andrew's football game, surrounded by cheers, by laughter, by celebration. But no one sang happy birthday to me. No candles, no cake. When we got home, there wasn't a gift waiting, just leftover pizza from Andrew's post-game party. I ate alone in my room, tears soaking into the cardboard crust, promising myself that one day I would never let anyone make me feel invisible again. Now, looking across the living room at the people who had orchestrated that childhood, I felt the old anger press against my ribs. They had forgotten so easily, but I had not. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitterness. Do you know what I remember most about growing up? I asked, my voice deceptively calm. Their heads lifted, caught off guard. Not the house, not the dog, not the vacations. I remember the silence. The way my achievements were met with indifference, while yours, I looked at Andrew, then Claire, were celebrated like Olympic victories. I remember birthdays erased, milestones ignored, and a phrase you loved to repeat, family comes first. My mother flinched. My father's jaw clenched. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. Claire smoothed her skirt as if ironing out the tension. But I didn't stop. The truth is, family only came first when it was convenient for you, and now 15 years later you're here. So tell me, is this another moment when family comes first? Or is it just another moment when Daniel has something you want? The silence that followed was deafening. And for the first time in my life, I was the one who had made them feel small. The silence stretched thick and suffocating like a fog no one dared cut through. I could feel them squirm, shifting in their seats, desperate for someone to break the tension. Finally, my father cleared his throat the same way he used to before delivering one of his lectures. Daniel, he began, voice measured, we were hard on you, yes. But we pushed you because we knew you could handle it. You've always been strong, independent. That's why you succeeded. Don't you see? Our way worked. His words were a spark to dry kindling. I clenched my jaw, forcing down the rush of anger. Their way worked, as if my achievements were their design, as though the years of neglect and indifference had been part of some brilliant strategy. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that startled them. Your way, I said, slowly left a 10-year-old boy eating cold pizza on his birthday while you cheered at Andrew's game. Your way made me invisible at every dinner table conversation, every holiday, every milestone. You didn't push me, Father. You abandoned me. My mother reached out, then her manicured hand trembling as it hovered above mine. Daniel, please, don't be cruel. We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought you knew we loved you. Love, I snapped, pulling my hand back. Love isn't silent. Love isn't selective. Love doesn't require a child to beg for recognition. Their faces blurred as memory dragged me back again. It was Christmas Eve. I must have been 12. Snow was falling outside, frosting the windows, while laughter spilled from the living room. Everyone was gathered around the tree, everyone but me. Andrew had just unwrapped a brand new mountain bike, and the room erupted in cheers. Claire received diamond earrings, delicate and sparkling. When it came to me, my father handed me a thin envelope. Inside a gift card. $50. No note, no thought, just plastic. Don't spend it all in one place, he joked, and the room chuckled. I forced a smile, even as heat rose in my chest. Later that night, I crept out into the snow, my breath fogging in the cold air. I looked up at the stars and made a promise one day I'd build a life so vast, so undeniable, that they couldn't ignore me. A life that would make them regret every dismissal, every forgotten word. And I had done it. I leaned forward, now staring directly at my father. You didn't build me. I built myself in spite of you. Every contract I signed, every deal I closed, every empire brick I laid, it was fueled by the emptiness you carved into me. I turned that emptiness into fire, and that fire lit the path to everything you see around you. Andrew shifted again, muttering, You're exaggerating. We were just kids. You're acting like some victim. I turned my gaze on him, sharp as a blade. Do you remember senior prom? When your tux didn't fit and Mom stayed up all night tailoring it for you? Do you remember who sewed my suit when mine tore at the seam? No one. I stapled it shut in the school bathroom. Andrew's mouth opened, then closed. Claire looked away, shame flickering in her eyes for the first time. And here's the truth. I want you listening right now to hear neglect doesn't always come in shouts or blows. Sometimes it comes in the quiet dismissal, in the absence of love when you need it most. Sometimes the deepest scars are invisible, the birthdays missed, the achievements, shrugged off the moments when those you love most look right through you. I took a breath, my voice steady again. So no, Father. Your way didn't work. I worked, I bled, I endured. And now you come here speaking of reconnection as if those years were just some necessary hardship. But you don't get to rewrite the past. Not in my house. Their silence this time wasn't just uncomfortable, it was heavy with recognition. For the first time I saw it in their eyes, the faint dawning realization of what they had done. But what they didn't yet know was that I had no intention of letting them walk away with just recognition. No, I was going to make them confront every ghost they had buried. The room felt like it was shrinking walls pressing in on all of us. My words hung in the air like smoke after a fire, suffocating, undeniable. I could see their discomfort, the shifting eyes, the hands fidgeting with invisible dust. But none of them spoke. And in that silence, I realized something. This was the moment they'd hoped to avoid. They didn't come here for closure. They came here for access. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence drag on just long enough to make them sweat. Then I broke it. "Let's stop pretending," I said quietly. "You didn't fly across the country to reconnect. You came because you need something. So tell me, what is it this time, money, influence? Or just a seat at my table now that it's set with more than cold pizza?" My father bristled, his pride still intact despite everything. "That's not fair, Daniel. We've made mistakes, yes, but we're still family, and family deserves another chance." I smiled bitterly. Family. That word again. You wield it like a weapon when it suits you. Tell me, where was family when I was sitting in a hospital bed at 19, fresh from collapsing at work because I was pushing 70-hour weeks to pay rent? Where was family then? My mother's lip trembled. "We didn't know." "Exactly," I cut in. "You didn't know because you didn't care enough to ask." Andrew finally snapped. "This is ridiculous. You're just trying to paint us as villains so you can play the martyr. But you wouldn't be where you are if you didn't have our blood running in your veins. You owe your success to this family, whether you like it or not." The laugh that tore from my chest was sharp and humorless. "Oh, I owe nothing. If anything, you owe me for surviving the weight you left on my shoulders, for proving day after day that I was worth more than the scraps you tossed me." Claire's voice was softer, calculated. "Daniel, we're not here to fight. We're here because things have been difficult. Andrew's business is failing. Father's investments haven't recovered since the crash. We thought, well, maybe if we all came together, we could—" She trailed off, ashamed to finish the sentence. And there it was, the truth finally spilled. They didn't want me. They wanted my success. They wanted the empire I had built from nothing, the house, the accounts, the influence. The very things they had dismissed me for chasing, now shone in their eyes like salvation. I leaned forward, my voice low, deliberate. So this is it. 15 years of silence. 15 years of indifference. And now, because your lives are crumbling, you remember me. You remember the son, the brother, the afterthought you once tossed aside. And suddenly, I'm family again. Their silence confirmed everything. I stood pacing the room slowly, letting the tension coil tighter with each step. Do you know what it feels like to realize your worth only when it's convenient to others? To be invisible until your success makes you useful. That's not family. That's opportunism wrapped in a bow of nostalgia. I turned sharply, facing them again. And let me be crystal clear, I will not be your safety net. Not now. Not ever. My father's face darkened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Careful, Daniel. Pride comes before the fall. You think your empire makes you untouchable, but life has a way of humbling men like you. I took a step closer, my voice steady but sharp as glass. Maybe it does. But the difference is I've already been humbled. I've lived at the bottom. I've tasted neglect. I've survived nights where the only thing keeping me alive was sheer willpower. There is nothing you can threaten me with that I haven't already conquered. So no, Father. I'm not afraid of the fall. Are you? He faltered, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. I let that moment linger. Then, turning to my siblings, I softened my tone, but not my resolve. Here's the truth: you had your chance to be my family. You squandered it. Now you're just strangers with familiar faces. And this, to those of you listening right now, is where I want to pause and ask, what would you have done? Would you have opened your arms, forgiven years of silence for the sake of blood? Or would you like me recognize that family isn't defined by DNA, but by presence, loyalty, and love? Tell me in the comments, because I know some of you have lived this exact story in your own way. The storm had broken, and yet the air inside my house still crackled with electricity. Their motives were clear, their desperation laid bare. But even as I stared at the people who once dismissed me, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of déjà vu. This wasn't the first time they'd come crawling. It was simply the first time I was strong enough to slam the door shut. I walked toward the window, the city skyline glowing beyond the glass. My reflection looked back at me, a reminder of the boy who once dreamed of escaping these very people. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I asked softly, not turning around. "It's not the neglect, not the favoritism. It's knowing that if I had failed, if I had ended up broken and penniless, none of you would be here tonight. You'd be miles away pretending I never existed. But because I succeeded, suddenly, my name is on your lips." I turned, then my voice rising. "Success shouldn't be the ticket to love. But with you, it always was." My mother tried again, her eyes glossy. "Daniel, please. We made mistakes. We can do better. Let's start over." Start over. I echoed the words, almost bitterly sweet. You don't get to rewrite the first 20 years of my life. You don't get to erase the nights I cried myself to sleep because my own family made me feel like a ghost. Andrew leaned forward, scowling. "You think you're the only one who's suffered. You think you're the only one carrying scars. You built this empire, and now you think you're better than us." I stepped closer, meeting his glare. "No, Andrew. I don't think I'm better. I know I'm different. The difference is, I didn't let my scars define me, I turned them into power. You let yours rot into excuses." The words sliced through him, and he leaned back, silence choking him. That's when I decided to lay bare the memory I had never shared, the night that shaped everything. I was 16. I began slowly working double shifts at a gas station because no one would help me pay for college applications. One night after midnight, I biked home in the freezing rain. I slipped on black ice and crashed into a ditch. Do you know who came for me? No one. I lay there bleeding alone, staring up at a sky that didn't care whether I lived or died. That was the night I realized I was all I had. And if I wanted a future, I would have to build it myself. The room went still. Even Andrew had no words. I let that memory sink in before continuing. "So forgive me if I don't buy into your sudden epiphany about family. I know the truth. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Love does, presence does, and you failed on both counts." For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then Claire, ever the strategist, tried to salvage what was left. "Daniel, we can't change the past, but maybe we can be part of your future. Maybe we can—" I cut her off with a raised hand. "Stop. You don't want to be part of my future. You want to be part of my fortune." The words dropped like a hammer, final and heavy. But here's the part I want you listening right now to really think about. How many of us carry people in our lives who only show up when it benefits them? How many of us confuse loyalty with obligation, thinking we owe those who share our blood even when they've given us nothing but pain? If you've ever faced that choice, I want to hear your story. Leave it in the comments because maybe your words will give someone else the courage to finally break free. I looked back at my family, their silence louder than any argument. "You had your chance," I said simply, "and you wasted it. This conversation is over." I walked toward the door, my steps echoing against the marble floor, each one louder than their desperate silence. But just as my hand reached for the knob, my father's voice stopped me. Low. Dangerous. "You think this is finished, Daniel. You think walking away makes you untouchable. Be careful. The world has a way of stripping men of their illusions." I froze, his warning hanging in the air like a shadow. My pulse quickened, but I didn't turn. Not yet. The truth was, I knew this wasn't over. And his words weren't just a threat, they were a promise. The knob was cold beneath my hand, but colder still was the silence behind me. My father's threat lingered like smoke in my lungs. I turned slowly, just enough to meet his eyes across the room. His expression wasn't anger anymore. It was calculation. That unsettled me more than shouting ever could. "Strip me of illusions," I repeated, voice steady, though my heart hammered. "The only illusion here is the one you've clung to, that I'd ever need you again." For a moment his jaw twitched, but he said nothing. The rest of them sat rigid like statues, afraid to move. And in that eerie stillness, something inside me shifted. I realized they weren't here to reclaim me. They were here to test me, to see if the boy they abandoned could still be manipulated. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I opened the door. Cool air from the hallway washed over me, cutting through the heat of the confrontation. I stepped out, closing the door behind me, not gently, but not slamming it either. Just final. The sound echoed in my chest. But as I walked down the long corridor, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by an unexpected ache. Because here's the truth I need you to understand: cutting people off doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like grieving the death of something that never really existed. I paused by the elevator, staring at my reflection in the mirrored doors. For years I had dreamed of this moment, the day I could finally stand tall in front of them and say no. But standing there, I realized something else: freedom comes with its own weight. And now I had to carry it. The ride down was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. Their faces burned in my memory, the guilt in my mother's eyes, the fury in Andrew's, the calculation in Claire's, and the shadow in my father's. I knew they weren't finished. People like them never walked away without another move. When the elevator doors opened, the city greeted me: neon lights, car horns, the rush of strangers who didn't know my name, but in a way knew me better than my own family ever had. Out there, I wasn't the forgotten son. I was Daniel Stone, the man who had built an empire brick by brick, and maybe that's what scared them the most. I climbed into my car, fingers tightening around the steering wheel. A question gnawed at me. Was I truly free, or had I just ignited a battle that would haunt me? I drove aimlessly, letting the city swallow me. Memories rose unbidden: the cold ditch on that rainy night, the laughter I once heard through closed doors, when my siblings celebrated without me, the rejection letters I hid under my bed, because no one wanted to hear about my failures. All of it felt like a lifetime ago, yet it still sat just beneath my skin. And then, like a cruel twist, my phone buzzed. A message, one line that made my blood run cold. "Enjoy your empire, Daniel. Let's see how long it lasts." No name, but I didn't need one. The venom in those words was distinctly his, my father's. I pulled over, heart pounding. I knew what this meant. They weren't just bitter. They were planning something, and it wouldn't be a plea next time. It would be war. I stared out at the city lights, breathing deeply, steadying myself. Because if there was one thing I had learned in the ditch at 16, it was this: when no one comes to save you, you save yourself. And this time I wasn't just fighting for survival. I was fighting for everything I had built. But I'll leave you with this thought: what would you do if the very people who raised you became the storm threatening to tear down your life? Would you face them head on, or would you retreat, hoping the storm passes? I knew my answer: I wouldn't run, not anymore. And with that conviction, I started the car again, the city stretching out before me like a battlefield. The war had only just begun. The city looked different that night. Every traffic light, every shadow between the skyscrapers felt alive, pulsing with the warning I had just received. My father's message wasn't idle rage, it was strategy. He'd never been the type to throw words into the wind. When he promised something, it was because plans were already in motion. As I drove through the maze of New York streets, I couldn't shake the question: what angle would he play? Power, money, reputation? Or something darker, something personal? I pulled into the garage beneath my penthouse, the tires screeching louder than I intended. My chest was tight, my hands clammy on the wheel. For years I had convinced myself I had outrun their reach. Now I realized I'd been living in an illusion of safety. Upstairs, the silence of my home felt suffocating. The wide windows overlooking the skyline no longer seemed like a view of freedom, they felt like open targets. I closed the curtains and poured myself a drink, the amber liquid trembling in the glass as I held it. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was recognition. I knew the way they operated. They'd never come at me directly. They'd undermine me brick by brick until the empire I'd built crumbled beneath my feet. I set the glass down and opened my laptop. Within minutes, I was reviewing contracts, balance sheets, the lifeblood of my company. If they wanted to strike, it would be here, in the only place I'd made myself truly untouchable. But as I scrolled, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't a threat, it was worse. A news alert. Stone Enterprises under investigation for fraud allegations. The words glared back at me, black and merciless. My breath caught. They'd moved faster than I anticipated. I skimmed the article, my pulse hammering. Anonymous sources, alleged accounting discrepancies, whispers of unethical partnerships, all baseless, all carefully planted, and I knew exactly who had planted them. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound ricocheting through the empty apartment. That was their opening move, not to destroy me, but to stain me. To drag my name through mud so thick it would suffocate everything I'd worked for. I leaned back against the leather couch, forcing myself to breathe. This wasn't the first time I'd been cornered. At 16, I had lain in that ditch, rain pouring down, convinced no one would come. And no one had. That night, I had learned how to fight when every card was stacked against me. Tonight would be no different. But even as I steadied myself, a darker thought wormed its way in. What if they weren't only after my company? What if they came for the people in my life? My employees, my few real friends. What if the battlefield stretched further than I could defend? I clenched my fists. No, I wouldn't let history repeat itself. I wouldn't watch as the only family I'd chosen, the people who believed in me, who helped build this empire, suffered because of the family that had abandoned me. The decision crystallized in that moment. I wouldn't just defend. I'd strike first. I rose, pacing the room, the city buzzing outside like a hive of secrets. The boy they had left bleeding in the ditch had grown into a man who knew their tricks, their lies, their greed. And this time, I had resources. I had leverage. I would expose them before they buried me. But here's the thing, because I want you listening right now to sit with this. Sometimes the people who hurt us aren't content with letting us walk away. Sometimes they follow, dragging shadows into every corner of our lives, daring us to fight or fall. And in those moments, we have to ask ourselves, are we prepared to fight battles we never asked for, just to protect what we've built? I walked back to the window, pulling the curtains open. The city glowed defiantly, daring me to rise. And I did. Because if war was what they wanted, I was ready. And little did they know I had weapons of my own. The next morning, my phone was already buzzing before dawn. Reporters, investors, even people I hadn't spoken to in years, all demanding answers. Overnight, the allegations had exploded like wildfire, spreading across headlines, social media feeds, and whispered boardroom conversations. I stood in front of the mirror, tying my tie with deliberate precision. On the outside, I looked calm, polished, composed, the image of a man in control. But inside, I was calculating every possible move, like a chess player who suddenly realized his opponent had set a trap 3 steps ahead. The news channels played in the background as I prepared for the day. Anchors speculated about my downfall. Analysts dissected numbers they didn't understand, and anonymous sources painted me as the villain. It was theater. And my family was directing the script from the shadows. But what they didn't count on was this: I've been underestimated my whole life. And every time I've turned the doubt into fuel. At the office, the atmosphere was heavy. My employees avoided eye contact, their faith shaken by the headlines. Whispers followed me down the corridor. I knew fear when I saw it. Not just fear for me, but for themselves, for their jobs, their futures. I gathered the senior team in the boardroom. The room was tense, the air electric with unease. I let the silence stretch before I spoke. They think they can destroy us with lies, I began, my voice steady. But lies only work if we give them power. We built this company on truth, on grit, on refusing to back down when the odds were against us. And now is no different. They want us afraid. I say we give them something else: resistance. Eyes lifted, shoulders straightened. In that moment, I reminded them and myself that this company wasn't just numbers on a balance sheet. It was people. It was survival. It was proof that the boy in the ditch had risen stronger than the storm that abandoned him. Still, I knew inspiration wasn't enough. I needed a plan, and plans require strategy. That night, I reached out to an old contact, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who had always known how to dig into shadows. When she picked up the phone, her voice was low, cautious. "Daniel Stone," she said. "I wondered when you'd call." I didn't waste time. I need everything on them. Financials, connections, deals they've hidden, anything that can turn this fire back on them. She was silent for a beat, then replied, "Be careful what you ask for. Once you see what's buried, you can't unsee it." But I already knew that. Because here's the truth: most people don't admit family secrets rot like corpses. And once you dig them up, the stench lingers forever. Still, I couldn't turn back. Later, staring out at the city from my office window, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about saving my company. This was about rewriting the narrative of my life. If I let them win now, then everything, the nights of hunger, the years of clawing my way up from nothing, the scars I carried, would mean nothing. And I refused to be erased. Now, I want you to think about this with me, because this is where I pull you closer. What would you do if the very people who abandoned you returned not just to take your success, but to rewrite the story of your survival as if it were theirs? Would you stay silent, or would you fight with everything you had? Because that's the choice I'm facing. And the answer isn't simple. It's not just about who wins the war. It's about who gets to tell the story when it's over. The shadows are moving and so am I. But here's what I won't tell you, at least not yet. I've uncovered something about them already, something that could crack their foundation wide open. It's bigger than I ever imagined. And when I reveal it, well, let's just say, the storm they started might consume them whole. Stay with me, you'll want to hear what comes next. The first crack in their armor came faster than I expected. My contact, a woman named Claire, emailed me a file that night. No subject line, no message. Just a single attachment encrypted with a password she texted me seconds later. Use wisely. I opened it, my heart pounding against my ribs. Inside were records, offshore accounts, secret wire transfers, a web of shell companies stretching across 3 continents. And at the center of it all, my father. The same man who had told the world he was the epitome of discipline, respectability, and order. The hypocrisy was staggering. While he accused me of fraud in the press, his empire was rotting from the inside, built on deception and stolen money. For a moment, I just sat there in the glow of my laptop, the city humming outside my window, realizing the enormity of what I held. This wasn't just ammunition, it was a nuclear weapon. If released, it wouldn't just clear my name, it would annihilate theirs. But as tempting as it was, I knew better than to rush. Timing is everything. One wrong move and they could spin it back on me. So I waited. I studied. I planned. The next day I walked into my office with a calmness I hadn't felt in weeks. The headlines still screamed betrayal. The analysts still speculated on my downfall. But I carried a secret now, one that shifted the balance of power. I called my senior advisors into the conference room. The glass walls reflected their nervous faces, every one of them waiting for me to deliver a miracle. Instead, I laid out the truth. Not the full file, just enough. Enough to show them that the storm we were facing was not about our mistakes, but about the lies orchestrated by the people who had abandoned me long ago. They want you to believe this company is built on fraud, I said, my voice firm. But here's the reality. It's their house that's collapsing. And I intend to make sure the world knows it. Whispers filled the room. Hope flickered in their eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the fear give way to something else resolve. But behind that resolve, I knew danger lurked. Because the moment my family realized I had the evidence, they would come harder, faster, more viciously than before. And they had resources too. Connections in politics, allies in the press, puppets willing to do their bidding. That night, Claire called again. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Daniel, you need to understand. This file, it's just the surface. If you keep digging, you're going to uncover things you can't control. People bigger than your father are tied to this. People who don't forgive curiosity. Her warning hung heavy in the air. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Because this wasn't only about vengeance. It was about survival. I leaned back in my chair after the call, staring out into the skyline. New York glittered like a battlefield lit up at night, every skyscraper a reminder of the wars fought in shadows. I had chosen my side and there was no turning back. Here's the irony: they thought they had broken me as a boy when they left me in that ditch. But what they really did was forge me into someone who could endure storms like this. And now the boy they discarded was the man holding their fate in his hands. Still a thought gnawed at me. If Claire was right, if my father's corruption bled into larger circles, then exposing him might unleash a war far bigger than anything I imagined. A war I might not survive. I exhaled slowly, gripping the arms of my chair. That's the thing about truth: once you hold it, you either carry it like a torch or it burns you alive. And I wasn't sure yet which one it would be for me. But make no mistake, I wasn't backing down. Because sometimes the only way to stop being hunted is to turn around and hunt. The first sign that my family knew I was holding something came not from a phone call or a letter, but from the sound of footsteps behind me in the garage. It was late, close to midnight. I'd left the office with the encrypted file on a flash drive tucked deep inside my jacket. The underground garage was mostly empty, the kind of place where echoes stretch longer than they should. That's when I heard it, the sharp rhythm of leather shoes striking concrete just a beat behind mine. I froze. Turning slowly, I saw a man in a tailored black suit, his face unfamiliar, but his intent crystal clear. He wasn't here by accident. "Mr. Stone," he said, his voice low, polite, and dangerous all at once. "My employer sends his regards. He advises you to tread carefully with certain discoveries. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself not to show the tremor running through me. This wasn't just my father anymore. This was bigger. Claire had warned me, and now her words rang like sirens in my head. I didn't reply, just stared him down until he smirked, slipped a business card into my coat pocket, and walked away. Back in the car, I pulled out the card. No name, no number, just a symbol, a silver crest embossed into the paper. It was enough to tell me everything I needed. My father's corruption wasn't isolated. It was tied into a network, a syndicate of power that operated in shadows where threats were delivered politely and consequences followed swiftly. For the first time since this battle began, I felt a chill of real fear. Not for my company, not even for my reputation, but for my life. The next morning, I met Claire at a quiet cafe downtown. She saw the card and her expression hardened. "You've stepped into something dangerous, Daniel," she whispered, leaning across the table. "These people don't negotiate. They erase problems. And right now, you are a problem." Her words landed heavy, but they didn't change my resolve. If anything, they clarified it. "Then we fight smarter," I said. "If my father's house of lies is tied to theirs, exposing him might unravel them too. But I need to control the story. I need to decide when and how the truth comes out." Claire shook her head, exasperated. "You're playing with fire. You think your father abandoned you before these people will make that look merciful." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "That boy they left to die in the ditch, he's gone. What's left is a man who knows how to survive storms. And I'm not backing down." She studied me for a long moment, then finally sighed. "If you're going through with this, you'll need allies. Real ones. People who owe you nothing so they can't be bought." That night I reached out to old friends, people I hadn't spoken to since the early days of the company, the ones who had believed in me before the headlines, before the billions. Some had moved on, some were hesitant, but enough of them still carried the memory of those nights we worked until dawn, building something from nothing. And slowly a quiet alliance began to form. But even as I built my side, I could feel the weight of what was coming. Because this wasn't just a family feud anymore. This was a war with no rules, where one wrong move could end not just careers but lives. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the card with the silver crest sitting on the nightstand beside me. The threat was clear: stop digging or pay the price. And yet as fear pressed down on me, I found something else rising inside. A strange, almost defiant calm. Because if they thought threats could silence me, then they never understood what they created when they left me in that ditch. They thought they abandoned me, but what they really did was teach me the cost of survival. And now I was ready to teach them what it feels like to face someone who has nothing left to lose. The first public blow landed on a Monday morning. I woke to headlines screaming my name in bold letters, "Stone tied to fraud network insider claims." The article wasn't just an attack. It was surgical, cutting deep with carefully selected half-truths designed to discredit me before I could move first. I knew exactly who was behind it. My father's allies had pulled strings in the press, trying to frame me as the architect of the very corruption I had uncovered. It was a move straight out of their playbook: attack, fast twist the truth, and drown the world in noise before the real story emerges. But this time I was ready. By mid-morning, I called a press conference. Cameras, microphones, the hum of reporters buzzing like bees. My advisors begged me to wait to let the storm pass. But storms don't pass on their own. You either face them or get swept away. I walked up to the podium, scanning the sea of skeptical faces, and began. "They want you to believe I am the fraud," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "But the truth is, the ones pointing fingers are the very hands drenched in theft and lies. They abandoned me once long ago, and now they want to erase me again. But this time, I hold the evidence. And I promise you the truth will come to light." The room erupted in shouts, questions firing from every corner. Some hostile, some curious, all hungry for blood. I didn't give them specifics, not yet. Timing was everything, but I gave them just enough to spark doubt in the narrative being spun against me. That night, as I replayed the press conference, I saw the shift beginning. Social media lit up, split between those who wanted to bury me and those demanding to see what evidence I had. And here's where I need to pause and speak directly to you. Stories like these, their twists, betrayals, and battles, are not just entertainment. They're mirrors reflecting the power plays in our own lives. If you've ever felt silenced or gaslit, you know the importance of having a community that believes in you. So if this story resonates, don't just listen, become part of the conversation. Hit subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and join others who know that truth matters. The fight was far from over, but I could feel momentum shifting. My enemies had drawn blood, but in doing so they exposed themselves. Every article, every smear campaign tied them more tightly to the war they thought they could fight in shadows. Behind the scenes, Claire worked tirelessly uncovering deeper connections. Offshore money trails didn't just lead to my father, they branched out to politicians, corporate leaders, even judges. It was a web so wide that pulling one thread threatened to unravel the entire fabric. But with every discovery came greater danger. Strange cars parked near my home, unmarked envelopes slipped under my door, anonymous messages warning me to stop before it was too late. And yet with every threat, my determination hardened. Because here's the secret my enemies never understood: once you've been abandoned with nothing, fear loses its grip. When you've already survived the worst, what else can they take? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. Claire's research hinted at a revelation that went beyond corruption, something personal, something my father had buried so deeply he believed it could never surface. Late one night, Claire called me, her voice trembling for the first time. "Daniel," she whispered, "there's something you need to know, something about the past, about why they left you in that ditch." Her words froze me. For years I thought I understood my family's cruelty. But what if their betrayal wasn't just about greed or power? What if it was about something darker, something that made me more of a threat to them than I ever realized? I sat in the silence after that call, staring at the silver crest card still on my desk, the weight of her words pressing down like a storm cloud. And for the first time since this war began, I realized the real twist wasn't about what I had discovered, but about who I really was. When Claire finally showed me the file, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a financial ledger, it was a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Except it wasn't the one I'd grown up believing in. My father wasn't my father. The name printed under parent wasn't Richard Stone, the empire-building mogul who raised me with cold precision. It was someone else. A man I'd never met, a name I didn't recognize. Claire sat across from me, her face tense. "Daniel, this is why they left you in that ditch. You weren't his blood. You were a liability to the narrative he built, to the dynasty he wanted to protect." The room tilted. For years I thought my father's betrayal was about money, about power, about control. But this was deeper, it was identity. It was the reason I'd never fit, the reason I'd always been an outsider in my own family's home. I pressed my palms against the table, forcing myself to focus. So all these years, everything I fought for, it wasn't even mine. "No," Claire said softly, "it's more than that. You were the crack in their foundation. And when they tried to erase you, they made a mistake. They underestimated what happens when someone learns the truth." Anger, grief, and clarity fused into one burning thread running through my veins. Suddenly, every memory of abandonment, every moment of being treated like a ghost made sense. I wasn't just discarded, I was erased. And that erasure became the seed of my resistance. That night, I went back to the house I grew up in. Not the empire's gleaming estate, but the smaller abandoned mansion on the outskirts, the one where my mother had lived before she disappeared. I hadn't set foot there in decades. Dust lay heavy over the rooms, and the silence felt like a tomb. In her study, I found the box. Letters, photos, fragments of a life carefully hidden. She'd tried to protect me, to leave breadcrumbs of truth in case I survived the storm. And there, among her belongings, was the final blow, a letter written in her handwriting. "My son, if you are reading this, it means they could not bury you forever. You are not his child. You are mine, and your blood carries a story older and stronger than their empire. They feared that truth. They feared you." I read it again and again, the words sinking into me like fire and ice. My entire life had been built on lies, but here in her voice, I found something stronger than bloodlines. I found purpose. When I returned to the city, Claire asked if I was ready to reveal it, to use this secret as the final weapon against the Stone Empire. But I wasn't ready, not yet. This truth was explosive. Once released, it couldn't be contained. It could burn down everything: their dynasty, their allies, maybe even me. Still, I knew one thing with certainty: the man who left me in that ditch all those years ago wasn't my father. He was just Richard Stone, a powerful man clinging to an illusion. And the empire he built was weaker than the boy he tried to erase. Now I understood the war for what it really was. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about power. It was about legacy, who gets to write the story, who gets to decide what family really means. And I swear by the memory of the woman who left me that letter, I would make sure the story ended on my terms. But before I could act, I needed to ask myself the hardest question was, I willing to destroy everything? His empire, my name, maybe even my life for the truth. As I stared out at the skyline that night, the answer formed like a whisper in my chest. Yes. Because the truth, no matter how dangerous, is the only inheritance I was ever meant to have. And tomorrow I would show the world what happens when a ghost refuses to stay buried. The city was electric that morning, humming with rumors. My press conference had cracked the wall, and whispers of betrayal swirled through boardrooms and back alleys alike. But this time I wasn't preparing to leak documents or call for an investigation. This time I was preparing for war face to face. I arranged the meeting myself, choosing a place where shadows met history, the Grandstone family estate. The same house where I once sat at long tables in silence, always reminded of my place, as less than always reminded I didn't belong. Now I was returning, not as their discarded son, but as their reckoning. When I arrived, the air was thick with the scent of cedar polish and old money. My father, Richard Stone, sat at the head of the massive oak table, flanked by his loyalists, board members, lawyers, politicians with too much to lose. Their faces were masks of control, but their eyes betrayed nerves. Daniel, he said, his voice low, almost calm. You've stirred chaos. You've put our legacy at risk. Why? I met his gaze without flinching, because it was never our legacy. It was yours, built on lies, blood, and theft, and I don't owe you silence anymore. Gasps rippled through the room, but I pressed on, my voice steady. You left me to die in that ditch because I wasn't your son. You thought you erased me, but here I stand with proof, with the voices you buried, and soon the whole world will hear them. I slid the birth certificate across the table. For the first time in years, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. You think this matters? He scoffed. Bloodlines are irrelevant. Power is what matters, and you'll never have it, Daniel. I leaned closer. You're wrong. Power isn't inherited, it's claimed. And today I claim mine. The room erupted, lawyers, objecting board members, panicking phones, buzzing with alerts, as the first leaks of my evidence hit the networks. Claire had timed it perfectly, offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, blackmail schemes, all released in real time while I stood in that room. My father slammed his hand on the table, his mask cracking. Do you realize what you've done? You'll burn this family to ash. I stood tall. Families aren't built on ash. They're built on truth, and maybe that's why I'll never be part of yours. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. The kind of silence that comes when a dynasty realizes it has been gutted from the inside. I turned to leave, but before I did, I gave him one last gift. You once told me I was nothing, that no one would ever remember me, but they will. Not because of your empire, but because I exposed it. As I walked out, I didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear the buzz of frantic voices, the clatter of collapsing control. For decades, they thought they could rewrite me out of existence. But the truth has a way of finding light, no matter how deep it's buried. That night, the world changed. News anchors dissected the scandal in prime time. Social feeds exploded with debates. Supporters called me a whistleblower, a hero. Others called me reckless, a traitor. But either way, my name was finally mine, not as a shadow, but as a force. And yet, even as I watched the empire crumble, a strange quiet filled me. This wasn't victory, it was survival. I hadn't destroyed them for revenge. I'd done it because truth once uncovered can't be ignored. But deep down, I knew one battle still remained. My father wouldn't surrender easily. His empire might collapse, but he would cling to power until his final breath. And I had to decide if I was willing to take this war to its ultimate conclusion. As I stared at the city skyline blazing with headlines, I whispered the promise I'd made to myself as a boy lying in that ditch. They may have abandoned me, but I will never abandon the truth. And tomorrow the world would see just how far that promise could reach. The final confrontation wasn't dramatic in the way movies make it look. There were no shouting matches, no flying chairs, just an electric silence filled with anticipation. My father, Richard Stone, sat at the edge of his office chair, the remnants of his empire crumbling around him. Papers scattered, phones buzzing, emails pouring in. His carefully constructed world built on control and deception was unraveling in real time. I stood in the doorway, holding the last piece of evidence, emails, recorded conversations, and contracts that mapped every lie, every bribe, every scheme he had orchestrated. It wasn't just proof of his corruption. It was proof of the years of manipulation and betrayal that had shaped my life. You thought you could erase me, I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. You thought that leaving me in the shadows would make me weaker, that I would crumble without your approval. You underestimated the very thing you tried to destroy me. His jaw tightened. You've gone too far, Daniel, he said, but the words had lost their power. There was no fear in me anymore, only clarity. I had survived everything he threw at me, and now the balance had shifted. I walked to the desk, laying the evidence down one piece at a time, watching his eyes widen with recognition. Every secret, every lie, every attempt to keep me from becoming who I am. All of it is here, and the world will see it. Not because I want revenge, but because truth demands it. He swallowed hard. The arrogance that had carried him for decades was slipping, replaced by panic. Daniel, think about what you're doing. This will ruin everything. I shook my head. It already ruined everything for me when you abandoned me. Today I'm just setting the record straight. Behind him, the silence of the office was punctuated by the distant sound of news alerts. The story was spreading faster than I could have imagined. Headlines flashed across my phone. Stone Dynasty exposed, insider whistleblower reveals. Family empire of corruption, and Daniel Stone's reckoning, the son who couldn't be erased. I could see it in my father's eyes, the realization that no amount of influence, no amount of money could erase the truth now. And I felt no satisfaction in the chaos. This was not about revenge anymore. It was about closure, about reclaiming the life and identity that had been stolen from me. Then I turned to my siblings. Andrew and Claire, who had once laughed at me, who had whispered and judged, now looked at me with something between fear and awe. You really were serious all these years, Claire whispered. Yes, I said simply. I was never pretending. And now you get to watch the consequences of your choices unfold. I stepped back, letting the weight of the room settle. There was no gloating, just the calm aftermath of truth, as undeniable as sunrise. And with that, I left the office, leaving them to their own reckoning. Outside, I exhaled deeply, the cool night air brushing against my face. I had won not because I had destroyed them, but because I had reclaimed myself. The years of pain, exclusion, and neglect had forged resilience, determination, and clarity. And as I walked through the streets of the city, I realized the most powerful truth, family, is not defined by blood or obligation. It's defined by love, loyalty, and presence. The people who abandoned me lost the right to define what family meant to me. I had built a new one, a chosen family, who supported, loved, and believed in me. To anyone watching this story unfold, remember this: sometimes the most difficult battles are not fought with fists, but with integrity, courage, and the willingness to stand alone against those who underestimated you. And when you do, the life you create afterward, full of love, purpose, and chosen connections, will be richer than any inheritance they could have ever given. If you've ever faced betrayal, exclusion, or rejection, remember your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it. Build your own family, protect your truth, and never let anyone else write your story. And now, if you want to see how Daniel's empire continues to grow, how the people who once doubted him become part of a larger story of triumph, click the next video. The journey isn't over, and the next chapter is even more astonishing. As the night settled over the city, I stood on my balcony looking out at the skyline that had witnessed both my failures and my triumphs. The wind carried a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged inside me and around me just hours earlier. The empire of lies my family had tried to hide, the manipulation, the betrayal, they were all behind me now. And in their place, I felt something I had never truly known: peace. The people who mattered, Claire, my first investors. My loyal team were not just colleagues or allies. They were family. Chosen family. The kind that shows up, the kind that celebrates your victories without envy, the kind that holds you when you fall. In them, I found the warmth I had been denied, the validation that came not from obligation, but from genuine love and respect. I touched the silver crest I had kept, as a reminder of the threats now transformed into a symbol of strength. The lessons were clear: resilience, truth, and courage create power far beyond inheritance or bloodlines. The boy abandoned in the ditch had grown into a man who knew that freedom wasn't given. It was claimed, fought for, and defended with every ounce of integrity. As I turned from the balcony, I saw the faces of those who had become my chosen family, laughing, talking, living. The mansion, the empire, the accolades, they were all meaningful because of the people who shared them with me. And in that moment, I realized the final truth. The scars of the past no longer defined me. They had sculpted me into someone unbreakable, someone capable of building a life overflowing with love, respect, and purpose. For anyone watching this, let this be a reminder: your family of heart is not always the one you are born into. Build it, nurture it, protect it, and always remember you are worthy of love, respect, and belonging just as you are. The past may shape us, but it does not define the life we choose to create. And today I finally chose mine.